Welcome to Syntax. Today we got a potluck for you, which is we bring the answers, you bring the questions. Today we're talking about the future of JavaScript frameworks, building your own auth, how to limit API access, Caddy server proxy. I show a little bit of my own code, passing components as props or as a child in JSX. And finally, we got some interesting questions around how should you structure and design your database, relational database. That's it. So let's get on into it. Welcome, Scott. How you doing today?
Oh, man, I'm doing super good. Just got back from a rousing trip to the airport, which is like, the best thing to do first thing in the morning is to drive out to the airport. Which in Denver, it's okay, but it is like 30 minutes without traffic. And then the moment you start hitting traffic, it's like really intense because it's mostly just like 2 lanes and stuff. So
brutal.
Yeah, definitely wake you up first thing. Yeah, for sure.
What's this shirt you got on? Vampire Weekend?
Oh, yeah. I went to the Vampire Weekend concert at Red Rocks last week. And, man, somehow, I don't know how, we got front row tickets, mostly because when we were like right at the dot to buy the tickets, but all of the cheap seats sold out so quickly, we're like, I guess we're getting really close. And we bought them in the second row, but it turns out the second row at Red Rocks is actually the first row. And they were normal concerts, they're like above you or something. They were like right at eye level. And just, I don't know, 40 feet away from me, if that. It was crazy. I just had a big old smile on my face the whole time, man. What a cool thing. And even CJ was 3 rows behind me with his wife there, so we got to see them and say hi. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Oh, cool. All right. Should we do a Sentry thing?
Oh, yeah. And if you want to be able to go to a concert and have the peace of mind to know that your application's running successfully without too many things going haywire, you need a service or software to make sure that the software that you're running is bug-free and you can track and keep a handle on all the bugs, but also stay on top of regressions or potential things that you thought you fixed, but maybe you didn't. For instance, Wes, I just rewrote our whole caching system to fix, well, for one, the API wasn't great.
Yeah.
But 2, it was to fix some Sentry errors that we were getting about the, Prisma validation stuff. And so I rewrote this whole thing, and I was so confident that the caching system was what was causing those errors. I didn't really dive in close enough to check, and then sure enough, they popped up as a regression. So I'm gonna have to look elsewhere because I don't think all of the Prisma validation errors were coming from the cache system, just some of them. So now I gotta dive into those a little bit.
Interesting. I love that about Sentry, where you can just like mark it as resolved and set it off into the C. And you say, I hope I never see you again. And sometimes
it comes back like a boomerang. Hits you right in the forehead.
Hits you in the head.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, that's a question I have for you is probably for the first 5 years of me working on my platform, whenever I would go away for the day, I would go visit my parents or we would go away for a day trip or something like that, I would throw my laptop in the car just in case something went down. And over the 5 years, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times something would go wrong. Maybe a bit more than that if you ask my wife. But every now and then I would just be like, hey, something's busted. I'm on call all the time. It's it's just me here. And I realized the other day, I haven't done that in a long time. Obviously, if I go on a more than a 1 day trip, I'll throw my laptop in the car just in case. But did you ever do that? You ever take your laptop with you? Because I was very scared to have my whole thing be down and not be able to fix it, especially after the horror stories we read on this show.
There's been times that I've had to pull out my computer at the ski lodge. I would take it if I was taking a ski day because I used to go up on Tuesdays. There's been times I was at a tea and biscuits thing and I had to pull out my laptop. The whole family's there. I'm like, I'm sorry, I have a sale going on. There's clearly an issue. I'm getting some alerts going. I gotta fix this. So I very much feel like that weight off my shoulders these days, which is an intense feeling. That's good. Sorry, before that, if you want to get all this, Sentry.io, sentry.io/syntax. Sign up and get 2 months for free. All right, let's get into it, Wes.
All right, first question from Abdurrahman. With so many JavaScript frameworks available, how do you see the landscape evolving over the next few years? Which frameworks do you think will gain more popularity and why? Ooh, that's a good question. And the what do you see the future questions are always tricky because I don't know. We're just guessing what the future looks like. But what do I think the future of the JavaScript looks like? I think that we aren't going to see a whole lot of shakeup, but I do see that now that we're hitting React server components, a lot of people will have not a significant rewrite, but it's a big enough bump in the road where enough of a bump for people to consider moving to something else, especially to frameworks that support JSX, because a lot of people will be looking at it and be like, well, I could move to solid or a solid start and still keep 81% of my code base. You kind of look
knowledge,
at it and go,
just general knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. And my knowledge, like the templating it doesn't need to be redone. In some cases, the state maps 1-to-1, but then I can maybe start using signals and whatnot. So I think we'll see a little bit of that, not a whole lot. I think we will start to see those things that people look at other framework and say, man, I wish that React had that. We'll see those features landing in React. I hope. I don't know if this is a guess or a prayer of mine to start seeing that. But honestly, like, which frameworks do you see? React will still be big. I think SvelteKit is going to have a big come up. I think probably Solid is going to have a big come up as well. And then I think Astro's been blowing up for a year now, just really gaining some serious momentum. I think it's going to continue right up on that trajectory.
Yeah, a big yeah to all of that. You know what? I totally agree with you. And I do feel like Solid is one of those things that if people really gave it a try to more, they would really feel the vibe, especially if you're coming from the React world, simply just because so many of the skills are transferable, but you also get so many of the lovely things that are lovely about compiled languages in general. So yeah, I do love the idea of Solid getting more use in general. I think you nailed it with Astro. The one thing that I would add on to all of this is I do think deep down, even if we're not seeing it quite yet, I do think deep down that the web component space will take over more of the elements that we end up writing in React right now. I think it solves a lot of issues. I think it's standards based. There's a lot of things to like about it. I don't think everyone has to author web components to make web components be viable. I think it's like you're probably going to be consuming them more as additions, extensions onto the HTML platform. And so that's the thing that I will add. Now, selfishly, I would love to have Svelte and SvelteKit really not like take over, because I don't have anything wrapped up in that where I need it to be number one or something. Mm-hmm. But I would like more people to try it, because when you try it, you really like dial into the simplicity of values changing rather than components re-rendering. And that's a big thing to me. Not only that, but it does feel very web platform. So yeah, I agree with just about everything you said, and to add on to it, I could see web components being used more often. Especially once was it Web Awesome? That's what it was called? Yeah. With the Shoelace folks. Once Web Awesome hits, I think people are going to be diving into that. I can't wait for Web Awesome, because
like you're saying, you're not going to be writing web components yourself, but there's going to be this just bevy of pre-built, extremely functional components out there where you can just grab them, slap them in. It doesn't have to be a React version of everything, or a Solid version, or a Svelte version of everything. It's just going to be a solid web component that you can slap in there, and then you can sort of take it from there.
Yeah. And the best part about that is, again, you're not shipping a library for those. You're shipping the web. It's able to work with stuff. So I could see that definitely being a thing. And I hope it is, actually, because, HTML elements are great. And if you get an extension onto HTML elements that are just like pre-built for you, then why not? Next question from a friend of the show, Ollie JT. How do you use a service like Caddy for local development alongside a modern framework like SvelteKit? Can this work with a Vite development server or only traditional apps? This can absolutely work alongside. Wes is he pulled up some code here. So if you're listening on the radio, Wes has pulled up a video. You can get the video version of this podcast on both Spotify as well as YouTube if you want to check out what we're showing. But Wes is showing off his Caddy file and how you can do this. Now, for the most part, it's not too difficult. There is some Vite-specific
this is way more
things.
Complicated than it needs to be.
It's more complicated than it needs to be, but it's a copy and paste, really.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain what you have?
Yeah, so the way that Caddy works is that it will proxy. We had a whole show on this. You can go back and listen to the local development proxies, or sorry, self-hosting proxies show we did. But the way that it works is you essentially set up a local development URL, and we recommend using the .localhost TLD. And what that will do is it will give you you can just say like myapp.localhost, and what that will do is it will proxy through your actual application. So in my case, my Vite server is running on port 7777. However, I can then access it on bossmonster.localhost. And in fact, I've taken it a little step further here and said anything.bossmonster.localhost. This is a wildcard domain there. And what that allows me to do is, because I have so many domain names for my courses, it allows me to go to typescript.bossmonster.localhost or react.bossmonster.localhost, and my app will deliver the contents depending on which domain name you're visiting. So it's as simple as that. Almost always your Caddy file is going to be like a 3-liner. You can even do it without even having a Caddy file, is with just I think it's just like a Caddy CLI command that you can paste in. But mine's a little bit more complicated because I just have some baggage from years past where I need to proxy multiple servers. So in my case, I'm proxying the Vite servers. I am proxying some of the Vite stuff for React Refresh. And then I also have an Express app running on port 3333. So it's proxying that, which is everything else. And then I also am proxying the WebSockets that come through Vite. And then I also am proxying my admin, because I have 3 servers in my application, and I'm proxying them all through one tidy domain name, which is pretty nifty. So again, this is much more complicated than it needs to be, but it shows you how you can sort of take multiple servers that are running locally, or not even locally, they're running on a server somewhere, and then you could proxy them all through one single clean domain name, and it's really nice.
Yeah, so to be clear, it doesn't need to be as complicated as yours. You may hit that WebSocket issue in which you'll Google it, and you will find a GitHub issue that I made about 3 years ago, and it has a solution in there. So it can be really simple. It can be very nice. And I honestly like it. We talked about this in the reverse proxy episode. Like sometimes things get wrapped up into localhost port 5347 or what it is. Do you know what it is offhand? I don't know.
51, 54, whatever, the like default Vite port. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is. And you get things like cookies saved to that. You get things like local storage or service workers stored to that. So actually having unique domains for each of your apps in localhost is great. Another one is Safari doesn't really consider localhost as being a secure context, I believe. Either way, I don't know if that's the full story, but Safari will not save HTTP-only cookies in localhost. So you do need to have a domain for that, and I believe even an SSL for local. I had a whole thing on that in my Auth course where it's like, here's how to get Safari working with cookie-based Auth if you need that.
Yeah,
so
it's just a pain. And also sometimes like local storage, a secure origin, one of them includes the port as the origin, and one of them, like I think it's cookies versus localhost, one of them doesn't include the port, which is like, so if you set, let's look it up. Are cookies set on all ports? Yeah, we go. Cookies given a host are shared across all ports of that host, even the usual. So yeah, if you set a cookie on port 6666, it's going to be available on port 3333. And that can be annoying if you're working on multiple applications that have the same cookie name.
I'm working on a ton of applications that have access token, refresh token as cookie names. And every time I switch context of what app I'm working on, I have to go into my application. I got to look for cookies. I got to nuke them. I got to refresh the page, re-log in. And that's just like, that's one of those things that just like takes you out of the flow of whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's annoying. So yeah, use Caddy, get a local domain name and a self-signed local certificate. Next question we have here from Chris M. When building a backend for a website, does it make more sense to pull in the various third-party resources you are using and have your front end pull from that API you made? Or does it make sense to pull from the front end to those third-party resources directly? So the example here is that if you have a website and you need to go to, he gives the example of Clockify. He has a Strapi CMS. where he's pulling his data through. But if you need data that is from a third party, like let's say you need to get data from GitHub or you need to get data from like a recipes API, does it make more sense to proxy that request through your backend, or does it make sense to go directly from the browser to that resource? And the answer, as everything in web development, is it depends. Generally, you are going to have some sort of access tokens which do not allow you to make that request from the browser directly, because that would be a security issue if you were to put your access token. So almost always you're going to be proxying that data through your own server. And that's really nice because it allows you to cache that data. Sometimes you only get like 60 requests per hour or 60 requests per day. We have that with the ConvertKit API, where we poll for a list of our newsletters, and then we render out a page, syntax.fm/snackpack. Make sure you go sign up for our newsletter. That list of newsletters is pulled from the ConvertKit API. And it doesn't make sense for us to ping the ConvertKit API every time somebody lands on it on the client side. We do it on the server side, and then we cache that result for an entire hour or something like that. So we are only doing it at most 24 times a day. And then you also aren't like bringing any extra data that you don't necessarily need. So I would say in most cases, it's better to proxy it through for security, for the actual data that you want, as well as for caching in for speed. Where it doesn't make sense is where that request is done per IP address. So for example, GitHub's API will limit the number of requests by the IP address. So if somebody was pulling in like a list of repos on their GitHub, your server would only be allowed to do that. I think it's like 60 times an hour or 30 times an hour. Whereas if you made the request directly from the client, if CORS allows for it to be done, then that each single person that visits your website, or at least each person on the same IP address, will be allowed to make all those requests. And in that case, you get a lot more requests per user. That can only come and bite you if you are on like a university network or something like that, where I've had it many times where I do my request timeouts for like signups on my courses per IP address. I often get like emails from people who work at universities being like, hey, we're trying to sign up as a class and there's 400 people in my class right now. And then it's blocking them, it's shutting them down because they're making 400 requests per IP address.
Word. Good answer. Next question here from Casper. And I just want to be clear before I read this question. This is not a plant. This question was not planted. This is a real question from a real person. He says, Scott, where do you get your amazing t-shirts? Specifically the Webmaster and the Blazing Fast ones. I saw you wearing at JS Nation and have been thinking about that shirt since. Casper, I'm so glad you asked, because that's right. This is. I swear this is not an advertisement, a place question, or anything like that. So we actually have a store, Casper. It's at century.shop, and it has all of these shirts and more. The Webmaster tee is one that we made in limited production and released twice, and they sold out very quickly. That's not to say it won't be back. In fact, we have possible plans to bring it back at some point here. So if you want to, one, get a discount on swag at the store, or two, know when this stuff is going to be coming out so that way you don't miss the boat, hop on our newsletter. And that newsletter is syntax.fm/snackpack, or you can just go to the website. There's newsletter signups all over the place, or even the shop, there's newsletter signups, because we let the newsletter folks know first when new things are dropping. We also have, we had Drizzle t-shirts, Prettier t-shirts. We did a collab with them, a Sick Pick t-shirt that's really sweet, a skateboard, a really awesome basketball with hand-done graffiti from a really incredible break dancer that I know personally, and yeah, so just a lot of really cool stuff. So check it out, century.shop. Yeah, check that out.
The basketball is really cool, man. Like there's so many
incredible.
So many cool things. And like this stuff does super well, even if obviously you're not playing basketball or skateboarding. It's really cool, good, what I call is background fodder. So when you have a meeting, something pops up, and it really helps when you jump into a meeting with somebody who, Scott is there, is you don't necessarily know all that well. It really says, oh, what's in the background there? Or, oh, I like the basketball in the background. That always happens to people. For me, it's always, wow, that's quite the mic. But if you don't have the mic, the background stuff works well as well.
I get that all the time. Or like you hopping on a call with a normal person and they're just like, whoa, you got the whole setup.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Especially
I'm
when
in
it's
radio, okay?
like someone like an insurance agent or something like that. No,
Yeah.
like, oh wow, like
What do
I
you
couldn't
do?
hardly get
Yeah.
Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, thank you for that question. Certainly check on those t-shirts out. The Blazing Fast shirt I'm very happy that one's doing well because that was so expensive. I made this I guess we haven't even talked about it on the show yet, but the Blazing Fast shirt was kind of a ridiculous design, sort of a play on NASCAR and whatnot, and has all the open source logos. And I had to message 1,000 open source people to ask if we could use their logo on the t-shirt, but that one came out so well, but it was very expensive to print because it's full color, full print, huge print.
Yeah, and we haven't actually been talking too much about the merch in general on this show, but one of the cool things about our merch in general is that we're not seeking to make a profit on this. We're not trying to hose you on it. So yeah, the shipping prices we know could be better. It's hard to have too much control over that. But we're trying to keep the prices as low as possible for everything, again, because it's not about making a profit. Sentry does not need the $1,000 a month or whatever we'd make off of the shop.
Yeah.
So yeah,
some of them are even sold at a loss, which it doesn't really matter all that much. But it's just kind of a fun thing we do. And the Drizzle and Prettier tees, plus a couple more to come pretty soon. The money goes towards the open source projects, $10 per tee, which is really cool. Next question we have here from Dennis Glassberg. Hey, Scott and West. Well, people always call me West. Tech Dad question for you. Any screwdriver recommendation that works best for your kids' toys? Yes. I unfortunately don't have it here, but I've sick picked it in the past. It's called the Pick Quick screwdriver, and I think this might just be a Canadian thing because whenever I look it up, it's only in Canadian websites. But it's called the Pick Quick 6-Pack Plus, and they sell these little screwdrivers.
That's my name in college. That's a classic West joke. I'm sorry. I had to.
I like that a lot. These screwdrivers are really cool because the bits go in the handle. I always lose my bits. Like my socket set, I've probably owned 8 socket sets over my life because I lose them, and
of course,
and then I just buy a new one. And this one has been so good for me because in order to get a new bit out, you must push in the old one. So there's 6 bits in the handle.
Checks and balances.
There's 6 bits in the handle, and then there's one in the driver. And in order to pull out a different one, you must take the one that you're using and use it to push the new one out. So it forces you to keep them organized. They have a little stubby one, which I really like. There's a Multique one, which I'm realizing these all have very French names.
They have it in USA Amazon, by the way. So
oh, do they?
It does exist for us. Yeah.
Go get it. The Multique is a smaller version, and that's our junk drawer, our kitchen screwdriver. It's great for kids' toys. It does kind of smaller screws. And then I have the little stubby one. I keep that in the glove box in the car because every now and then that sort of stuff pops up. So big fan of that. I do want to try out the Linus Tech Tips screwdriver because that is ratcheting, and I think that would be pretty nifty. I just have not broken down because I've got a couple Pick Quick 6-packs around the house, and they've been fantastic.
Yeah, I think this is a lot better than what I have, but I have an old snowboarding screwdriver that was a tool that you'd keep on you on the mountain to tighten your stuff if you needed it. And it was ratcheting, and it had all the bits in the handle, kind of like this. And I got to tell you that ratcheting really is pretty sick. So yeah, I'll have to look up this Linus Tech Tip one. Yeah,
I got a couple ratcheting ones, but the bits are just those tiny little ones, and they always fall out, and they rattle around, which I don't like any of that. And I think the Linus Tech Tips one solves all of those problems. So it seems legit. I think I'm gonna get it at some point.
Sick. All right, next question from Dan Chanier, which Dan, thank you so much for providing this pronunciation because his name is spelled Choiniere, and I would never have gotten that. So shout out to you, Dan. That rules. Dan says, would like to hear your thoughts on DB design, database design. I'm mostly front-end dev, but have been playing around with some back-end stuff on the side projects. I've never had to go through the process of planning out DB tables and relations between them and I'm finding it to be much more complex than I thought. Curious if there are any strategies or tips when planning out a web apps database. Yeah, so Dan, I come from a world where the database I worked in primarily was Mongo, and the strategy in Mongo was to just nest it all, nest. And within relational tables, anytime you would nest, you're pretty much creating a new relation and a new table for that. You're doing so through a key, like through an ID, right? Now, a lot of times your ORM that you're picking dictates the way you author that. And then the ORM handles all of the more complex bits of making sure that relation is performant, right? But every single time you would typically nest data in a structure, it makes sense to make that be another table. Or perhaps like sometimes you even have things that are like roles, right? Roles is not even nested, it's just an array of roles. But sometimes it makes sense for that roles to be a table itself as well. Now, I'm not an expert in database design, so I think Wes and I should probably take some time to do some deep research and maybe do a whole episode on this stuff, or at least a hasty treat to give a little bit more tight of an answer. So you could think about it like this, right? If you have one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many relationships, those types of things are important to set up correctly at the start. And how you think about that is really you have to think about how this data is being stored and used. So, for instance, a user can have a session, and a session can only belong to one user. You log in, that's a session. That session belongs to one user. More users can access that session. That session cannot belong to more users. That's a one-to-one relationship. Each time you query a user, that user's ID is able to pull in the session or the direct sessions. Hey, actually, that's a one-to-many relationship, right? Actually, let me take that back. One-to-many. A user can have multiple sessions. You log in from your phone, you log in from your computer, you log in from your watch. That's 3 sessions, okay? So one-to-many. A syntax. We have a show. A show can have a guest. We can have many guests. A guest can be on many shows. That's a many-to-many relationship. We had, let's say, Fred from Astro. We've had Fred on 3 times. Also, the show could have multiple guests on at once. So, many to many. So you just have to think about how the data is used in that way, and then you set up your queries accordingly. Now, like I said, I'm mostly working in ORMs, and the ORMs kind of dictate everything there. So you just have to think about how this data is being used and stored. And for the most part, you're creating more relations each time you're having connected data.
Yeah.
So let's take some time to really strategize on DB design itself, because besides indexes and performance, things like that, I'm no expert myself, given that the database I chose to use did not even have like schema safety for most of my career.
Yeah, my only advice here is what I've been bitten on in the past, and I always now will err on the side of making another table instead of dumping a bunch of data into a field or adding another category. If you find yourself adding like underscores, maybe like we have a show but you maybe like a show underscore guest. No, that should be a related table. And even like Scott said, I think one of the important parts he said was anytime you're going to be nesting data, err on the side of creating a new table. In fact, things like Prisma will just force you to make another table, like you're like, it's just an array of strings, like a couple tags for a blog post. I'm just going to put them in there. It's just a piece of JSON. That becomes really hard to then query and filter. And it can also become a bit of a performance bottleneck if you need to be able to look for shows with a specific tag. So err on the side of doing more tables than you actually need. And I think an ORM makes these things a lot easier, at least for like 2 knuckleheads like Scott and I who are not like geniuses with this type of stuff.
I know I come from a firmly front end world, so I'm certain. Don't take my opinion as expert opinion here. One thing that I found to be helpful for somebody like me is from the very start, whenever you create a new field, a created at and an updated at field, like having those in there from the start,
automatically
feels like automatic, right? And that's actually one thing I like about some CMSs, like Pocket Base always has that for you, and you don't even have to think about it. So like, if you can have those fields in there, it helps down the line.
I just think back to when I was in university. I have like a business technology degree, and like a couple of the courses we had to like database design, like schema it out. We had to use like Microsoft Access, or we had to use some sort of like schema design thing. And it was hilarious because we would like turn in these like very obscure arrow diagrams, one to many, many to one, all these things. And like I look back at it now, like actually having done this stuff, and I was like, I had no idea what I was talking about. And like I passed it, like I went to school for this stuff, and I don't think I really knew what I was doing then.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Next question we have here from John, episode 796. Do we need frameworks? The answer the boys gave was great, but I want to point out that front-end masters, their whole platform is vanilla JS, HTML, and CSS, or at least it was 2 years ago. Not saying it's smart to build Amazon with vanilla, but I do believe it is possible. So I thought, yeah, okay, front-end masters not using a framework, they're not using React or whatever, but they're probably using like Rails or something and just doing all of it server side. So they probably still are. So I tweeted at Mark, who owns Front-End Masters, and I was wrong there. He said, the only dependency we have is lit-html, 3K for a rendering package from the lit framework. We don't use lit, only the renderer, and then go with the same vanilla standard philosophy on the back end. The back end is in Go. So that's a good example of, you don't necessarily do need a framework. We said our answer to that was like, yeah, you probably do need a framework for most of this type of stuff, but yeah, you don't always need it. Like I guess like a good chunk of my website also is framework-less, just the viewing experience itself, and the admin is built on React.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you don't need all that stuff to happen in the client side. You can have normal multi-page application page load. I mean, now that we're going to get multi-page application,
he's not even using like a Rails on the back end. So I was like,
using Go.
Yeah, but like
there's
not
a server there
Go framework though. Like that's just like straight up PHP, make your own thing. But at the end of the day,
it's actually not bad.
You're building your own framework, I think. But I thought that was a great example. So thank you, John.
Because you do need templates. You do need to load the data and get it into the client somehow. So you have a
JSON
routing.
Helpers. Yeah.
It's bespoke, but it, I don't know. That line is so blurred, right?
Yeah.
All right. Next question from Jace Munkey. Hi guys, I've been doing front-end dev for a long time. Once upon a time, I did a little bit of PHP and MySQL as well. I'd like to get some exposure to the back-end full-stack web development, so I thought about starting to trying to build a basic login system for a web app. Any suggestions on which tech stack to use? Next.js, Express plus React, what kind of database? I want to choose something that is a common stack these days to maximize the benefit to my employability. I know some people out there will say don't build your own auth solution, but the point of this is to be a learning exercise. Hey, I'm right there with you. I've built many an auth system myself, and I like doing it. I did it as a learning experience myself. I've since then adapted that code all kinds of ways, and I did 2 courses on it. So those are free, by the way, levelup.video and Node Auth Fundamentals. It's available for you if you get stuck or you want some strategic guidance, or even if you want some full code examples. I like this kind of thing, and I get where you're coming from. So what tech stack to use? I think that's less important. If you're building Auth, that's more about the node side of things, the database side of things, than it is the front end. And the front end side of things, that can be whatever you know the most. But if you're looking for an opportunity to expand your horizons, you can't go wrong with picking React as your front end. Now, React plus Express, Wes, you probably feel differently than I do on this. I would not do React plus Express. You have a lot of docs on Express. Express works really well.
No, I wouldn't either.
I might pick something like Hano, which is a more modern one. Anything that gives you that routing, like Express, is going to be fine. I don't know if you need to dive into Next.js. If you're adding a lot of stuff in here, you're doing database, you're doing Auth, you're doing React. Adding in Next.js, which is very specific, feels like too much for me. So I might keep it at just React, Hano, and then do your Auth stuff in Node with the given Node ecosystem.
I'm very much on the same page as you. I think it's great that you want to implement it yourself. I think people are way too quick to say use Clerk or use what's the other one? Sponsored this podcast for like 3 years. Why am I forgetting it?
Auth0.
Auth0, because that's really easy and you get up and running. But like those things get real expensive real quick when you sort of scale up. And those things also have every feature under the sun, which is you might need at some point, but nothing better than just learning how it all works by coding it up yourself, like Scott said. So I would pick, if you're going to do the back end, use Hano.js specifically because they have this concept of middleware. And what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to write a middleware that can protect. Maybe you want to protect a couple of routes and maybe a couple endpoints. So you write a middleware that checks if the request coming in has a cookie. And if it does have that cookie, you do the auth to make sure that they have access to the resource that they're requesting. So Hano.js, very good for that. The reason why I say Hano.js is because you can very easily port those requests. Those requests are based on web requests and web response. You can very easily port that to Next.js or SvelteKit API or AWS serverless. You can port that to anything because the future of the web is not built on request and connect. That was sort of an older version of it. The new version of it is built on web requests, and being able to port that from one to another is very important. Database-wise, it honestly doesn't matter. I don't know, try SQLite. That would be kind of neat. Or you try Drizzle with MySQL or Postgres. And then on the front end, it doesn't matter because I would probably not, while you're building this, don't muddy it with React or a framework. Just try two things. First, try to protect a URL that should be protected. So /admin. And then second, try to protect an API endpoint that returns some, like who the user is, return the user's email address /me, returns their email address and their username. And if you can do those via a fetch request and literally a link that you click, then you will be able to do it in any framework.
Yeah. And on the auth tip, we did do an episode 336. I'll link that in the show notes of how to build your own auth. And it goes through high level of JWTs, cookies, cores. A lot of the times people hold themselves back from learning how to build auth because they get afraid of the security implications. I mean, really, as long as you're salting and hashing your passwords, you're not storing things in plain text, you're using a secure means of storing those cookies for your access tokens and refresh tokens. You just follow some basic rules here, and it's much more of a simple process than you might expect. And the simplicity in that process makes it a little bit less scary once you actually realize what's going on. And like you mentioned, the moment you offload your auth to another service, your auth is living on somebody else's computer. It's living on some other database. It's no longer within your same database. It's hard to take with you. It's hard to really own that. You're at the whims of some other service. What happens if that service goes down for a day? Your auth is pooched, even if your site is up. So it's important to think about those things if you want to, have a long-lasting application.
Next question we have here from Jonathan Land. Hey, y'all. Long time, first time. Love the new stuff you've been doing and the extras that CJ has been posting to YouTube. Yeah, CJ has been posting some fantastic YouTube videos, so certainly check that out on the Syntax YouTube channel. I want to know if you ever plan on publishing video episodes to the podcast. So, Jonathan, I think what he's referring to here is he might be saying you should post a video version of the podcast, which we do. It should be very clear to everyone. If you want to watch the video podcast, the best way to do it is either watch on YouTube or go on Spotify. And Spotify is really cool because you can just open up the Spotify app, it'll show you video, and then when you lock your phone, it'll just immediately cut over to audio. He might also be asking here is just like using a RSS feed via another podcast feed will also have the video. And that is really tricky because the RSS feed essentially needs to be a whole new feed. There is no way, at least when I've looked into it, there is no way to offer both audio and video via the same RSS feed, which is really wild to me. I guess the podcast spec was made many, many years ago before video was. And I've looked into podcasts that do offer video, and they always offer just like a second version of it, which is really frustrating because like, the kind of sad thing is I just recommended you to proprietary viewing experiences, which do not use the podcast RSS feed,
Yeah, for real.
But certainly, if you do not know, we have been offering this in video for I think over a year now. So certainly check that on out. I really like the Spotify experience because if you are doing dishes or something like that and we mention something that is visual, like the basketball that we talked about earlier, you can just quickly open up the app, take a look, and then close it on down, continue on your day.
Yeah, the video version of the podcast, I feel like, is now the best version of the podcast, but we try to make it so that you don't lose anything on the audio experience as well. So if you ever feel like we're drifting from that, let us know. But we are trying to show more code now as much as possible. It's much easier to explain things when you have it right in front of you instead of like mouth coded also. Yeah. Next question from Hoppelganger, passing JSX named props versus JSX children. Which do you prefer, and does your choice change for different use cases? So what they're saying is, let's say you have a card component and you want to pass in the contents of that component. One way to do it is to wrap another component inside of that card. So you have card, and then using it like an HTML element, you are inserting another element. Another version of that is you could pass a physical component as a prop into that component. So, what do you prefer? I almost always do the children approach. I'm going to say 100% of the time I do the children approach. Mostly just because in my mind, that is the way it works. Your child is coming into your component, and a component is usually wrapping around it in some regard, whether that's functionality or display-wise. So to have it physically be represented in that way, to me, makes more sense, and that's how I've really done it ever since, as long as I can remember.
Yeah, I will always say it depends. So I will pass as a child if that is the child is the main content that goes into the body of the component, right? So if you have a blog post component and you are simply just passing the text that needs to go into the blog post component, then I would pass that as a child. However, it's kind of limited because you get one, you only get one. And that's really frustrating to me because so many other frameworks have this concept of slots where you can pass it. It reads so much nicer when you can pass it as a child component versus trying to shoehorn a component in as a prop, because if your component also needs to pass props, it gets very hard to read very quickly. So I wish JSX had the concept of slots like SvelteKit does, because then you can just say, all right, well, I have this component and I need to pass it three other components. I need to pass it an icon. I need to pass it something that goes in the sidebar as like a promotion, and I need to pass it the main content for that component. If that's the case, it's really hard or not possible to pass it as a child, and you need to individually separate those out into three different props of your initial component. So I'll say I don't like either. I don't like either of the solutions there, but if it's one thing, I'll use a child. If it's multiple, I'll pass them as props while secretly wishing that we had the concept of slots in JSX.
I'm going to tell you, for your example of like a button with an icon, what I'll almost always do is have the button component itself pre-include the icon component. So I'm not passing the icon component into the button, and the prop I'm passing into the button is a string of the icon name, which is, validated via TypeScript or whatever to say these are the following icons.
If you know them ahead of time though. But like, for example, if you're using a third-party component and you want to specify what the component is to click the play button, that third-party component doesn't know about your icons ahead of time. You want to bring your own component for that type of thing. And if that's
I don't work in third-party components, Wes.
No?
I only write first-party components. No, I am. That is actually, I would say that's a flaw of mine as a developer, to say I don't need your stinking third-party components. Let me do it myself, and let them be ever so slightly worse.
What about the media controller syntax player, passing the forward 30 seconds and previous 30 seconds components there? How is that done?
I'm following the whims of the Web Components API. So for me, if I'm using something like that, I will follow their API. So you make the icon available as its own component, but then if you have your own button component with an icon in it, you wrap that icon into the button from the get-go. And then if there's no string for the icon name, you don't show the icon at all. Therefore, it's a nice little API to say, okay, this has an icon, and it'll adjust accordingly. But if you want to use that icon itself any other way on its own, you can certainly do that as well.
Awesome. And also, I think for like tree shaking passing in is a lot easier as well, because like if you have 20,000 icons that are possibly there, it's a little harder. I don't even know if it's possible if you were to tree shake the name of the icon and then you need to dynamically require that icon.
You'd have to dynamically require it. Yeah. You know what? It's funny that I've been doing only like SVG sprites and stuff like that for all my icons lately. So they're all being loaded anyways.
All right. That was a great question. I like that a lot. Thanks so much for sending that on in. All right. That is the last question we have there. Please keep your questions coming. Go to syntax.fm and click on potluck queues in the nav. Send us your question. We love answering them on the show. Let's get into some sick picks.
Yeah, sick picks. Hey, I'm going to sick pick some earplugs. Now, my wife sleeps with earplugs every night, and it's helped her sleep a lot. And one of the things that is like, you have your classic foam that you like squish up and you fit in there, or you go high end and get some really fancy ones. I kind of, bit the link, or not the LinkedIn, the Instagram E.
Oh, for the silicone ones?
The silicone loops. So they're just kind of nice little loop based silicone, and they come in a nice little case, earplugs, and you wear them every night instead of having to, change them out. They last forever. Courtney, they're kind of like AirPods without anything. They're $27. So if you're comparing that to like the cost of a earplug that's like a little foam one, it's obviously much more expensive, but you use them forever. And she took these to a concert. She wears them to sleep. They're great, and they work really well. And I think they're a little bit they're pretty comfortable to keep in if you want to sleep with them or anything like that. And they come in all kinds of colors. So at first I thought it was a little goofy. It looks like like an actual earbud, but no audio. It's like, why would you need that? But in practice, I found these things to actually be pretty neat.
Awesome. If you do not want to pay the dropship brother price that Scott did, you go to AliExpress and get them for $3.
I think these are actually not drop shipped. I
really?
think there are probably ones.
What's the company?
Loop.
Loupe.
Loop.
Loop. Okay, you're right. Somebody had messaged me about this that works at Shopify. Apparently they were working with them. I do. It's funny that we get the same ads. I get these ads all the time.
You are almost 40 ads, so you're going to need earplugs to sleep. Yeah.
Oh man, I fall asleep with AirPods on, which I realize is awful, but I'm dying because I have 3 pairs of AirPods, and 2 or 3 of them at all times are missing one because they fall under the bed. And then what the saddest thing ever is the Roborock sucked one up, and I threw it out before I even noticed. So now I'm like thinking, do I want to pay for like a replacement, or do I get a new pair?
Let me tell you, Wes, the very first thing I do every single morning is I wake up and I say, all right, where are my AirPods? That's the very first thing I do in the morning. I find the AirPods, I put them in the case. I need them charged if we're doing the show or whatever. So yeah.
My biggest flaw in life is I just buy multiples, and then I end up with all of my multiples being awful. Same with my socket sets. I have 3 socket sets, and they're all missing sockets. Yeah. And if I just had my life together a little bit better, I could have one with no missing sockets. But
hey, that's how it goes.
Yes, I am going to sick pick the Gecko's Toes, a hose rack, and this is not for a hose. So we recently got a electric car, and we got the charger installed in the garage, and the distance from where the charger is to plugging it into the car is about 2.5 feet, and the charger cord comes with a cord that is, I think, 20 feet long or 25 feet long. It's ridiculously long, which it makes sense. You can, if you park in the driveway or you park on the other side of the garage, and it reaches absolutely everywhere. But it's just too much cable to have coiled up. And I coil it over top of the thing, but it gets in the way of the garage door. So I went online and thought, like, what are people doing to manage this? And a lot of people are using this really cheap little plastic hose rack called Gecko's Toes. We'll show a photo of it online, or you can Google it right now. It's essentially just a bunch of little slots where you can hang a hose in, and I bought 2 of them, and I just fed the charging cord up and down, up and down, up and down, so that it's a kind of nice and tight and tidy. And I'm just going to leave it in there unless I actually need to pull it out all the way. So this is something that a lot of electric car owners are using to sort of organize their cables.
Yeah, so shameless plug. We mentioned it in the middle of the show, but check us out on YouTube. Smash that subscribe button.
Yeah.
We would love if all of you would go to youtube.com/@syntaxfm and just like really pound that subscribe button as hard as you can. That'd be great. We know how hard you press the button, so it would be cool
we can
to see if we can break it. Yeah. But no, that's it. The youtube.com/syntaxfm. Check it out. And that's all I got.
That's a really good idea I'm trying to think of, the Century Hack Week is coming up. I'm trying to think of like what would be a good project to do. And I kind of want to do something that's hardware related again. But imagine a subscribe button that tells you how hard you smashed it.
Yes. This is I'll show you something right quick.
Okay.
Here. I bought some hardware I don't know if I'm going to do this for the Hack Week project, but I want to make this at some point. And it's just a MIDI slider, a single MIDI slider.
So tiny.
It's so tiny. What I would do is keep it right here on my desk. And the plan for this MIDI slider is to write an application that is, if I want to raise my hand to talk while we're doing the podcast, I would just slightly move this up for like, and a little hand would come up. And then I would raise it higher and the hand would get higher. And then I move it to the top and the hand's like, I want to talk.
That's good. It should control a hand in my office. Like, what if we both had one and we connected them to the back of the monitor? And then when one of us wanted to talk, you could just scroll it up and it would come up behind my monitor.
Oh, my God. Yes. Oh, that's hilarious.
It's not a bad idea.
I know. I actually built the part of it that works in terms of like I have the WebSocket and the whole thing going already with a physical slider in the browser, and it shows the little hand coming up. So all I have to do is connect it to the MIDI API, and it should be good to go.
That's good. That actually, maybe that'd be a good show, is just us talking about our ideas and then have an after show of what we did. My other one was I hook up the Nerf gun so that if I have an uncaught exception, it shoots a bullet at me. Because there's switches in it. There's just two switches.
You're going to train yourself to like be really be on edge all the time. That's going to make you stressed out.
Oh yeah. I think it'll be funny.
You're going to be bracing.
Cool. All right. Well, stay tuned for ridiculousness. Thanks, everybody. Peace.